The Playboy Clubs survived the feminists, survived Gloria Steinem going undercover to expose them, survived protests outside recruitment lines and strikes on the floor. For 25 years, the empire kept growing. 40 clubs, 1 million key holders, the busiest nightclub in the world. Sinatra performed, Dick Gregory broke barriers. A 32-piece orchestra backed legends from coast to coast. Then the clubs didn't die from controversy. They died from a spreadsheet, a licensing model that made the bunny logo more valuable than the clubs themselves. A founder who looked at everything he'd built and called it an albatross. The revolution didn't kill the Playboy Clubs. The revolution's accountants did. And on the final night, in a highway interchange in Michigan, the last bunnies served drinks to a nearly empty room. Picture a Saturday night in Chicago. The year is 1972. Outside, February wind cuts through the Gold Coast, but inside, the air is warm, with cigarette smoke and expensive cologne. A 32-piece orchestra plays standards. Frank Sinatra headlined last month. Sammy Davis Jr. the month before that. Tonight, it could be anyone. Tony Bennett, Dean Martin, Ella Fitzgerald. The Playboy circuit could keep an entertainer working all 52 weeks of the year, and the biggest names in American music wanted in. At the door, a woman in satin and bunny ears, the door bunny, they called her, examines your key. Not just any key, a rabbit head metal key, polished, numbered, the most exclusive membership card in America. $25 a year, a lifetime membership for $50. And with that key, you belong to something. Inside, the club sprawled across multiple floors. The living room, where local musicians played and magicians worked close-up tricks at your table. The Playmate bar. The dining room, where you could get prime rib and lobster for prices that felt like a steal. The club room, where the headliners performed for crowds who'd flown in from Des Moines and Denver and Dallas just to be here, just to hold that key, just to say they'd been. And everywhere, the bunnies, women in costumes so carefully engineered they'd been patented by the United States government. Strapless satin corsets, bunny ears perched on perfectly styled hair, 3-inch heels, cotton tails, the bunny dip, that signature back-leaning move they used to serve drinks, a move they'd practiced for hours in bunny school before they ever touched a tray. The smell of the place, prime rib fat, sizzling, whiskey, perfume, the particular scent of money being spent on pleasure, the sound, ice clinking, laughter, the soft shuffle of patent leather heels on carpet, the orchestra swelling into a familiar melody, applause rising and falling like breath. This was the Playboy Club. Not one club, 40 of them, spanning Chicago to London, Miami to Manila, New York to Tokyo. More than 25,000 women had worn the ears. More than 1 million men held keys. The London casino was the most profitable in the world. The magazine had just hit 7.2 million readers, the highest circulation it would ever reach. Standing in that room in 1972, surrounded by celebrities and cocktails and beautiful women, you would have never believed what was coming. How could you? Every metric pointed up. Every number said expansion. The Big Bunny jet, a $4.5 million black DC-9, was taxiing past travelers at O'Hare, the rabbit logo gleaming on its tail. This was the summit, the highest point, the moment when Hugh Hefner's empire of pleasure seemed not just successful, but permanent. They just didn't know it yet. 14 years later, the Chicago Club would close, the New York Club would close, the Los Angeles Club would close, all on the same day, June 30th, 1986. And Hugh Hefner himself would call the bunnies a symbol of the past, would call the clubs he'd built an albatross. The last American Playboy Club would close in 1988 in Lansing, Michigan, in a highway interchange surrounded by motels charging $29.95 a night, and Big Mac signs and self-serve gas stations. The marquee would read, "Help US Celebrate." The club would be nearly empty. How did this happen? How did the busiest nightclub in the world, an empire with 40 locations, 1 million key holders, the ultimate American status symbol, become so irrelevant that its own founder couldn't wait to be rid of it? To understand how it ended, you have to understand how it began. With a man, a magazine, and a kitchen table in Hyde Park. We tell the stories of what America built and how it fell apart. If that's your thing, subscribe. More of these are coming. Now let's get back to the story. Hugh Marston Hefner was born on April 9th, 1926 in Chicago. His parents, Glenn and Grace, were conservative Midwestern Methodists, the kind of people who didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't swear, and didn't go to the movies on Sundays. Glenn was an accountant, rarely home. Grace was austere, imposing. She wanted her eldest son to become a missionary. The Hefners traced their ancestry back to Plymouth Governor William Bradford and the Puritan patriarchs who built America on restraint and righteousness. Their son would build an empire on the opposite principle entirely. Young Hugh had an IQ of 152, but his grades were only average. What he excelled at was everything outside the classroom. He founded the school paper at Steinmetz High School, became president of the student council, created a comic book called School Days. He was, even then, building worlds on paper, worlds where he got to make the rules. The army took him in 1944. He served as an infantry clerk, drew cartoons for military newspapers, and came home in 1946 to a country that had just won a war and didn't quite know what to do with itself. Hefner enrolled at the University of Illinois, doubled up on classes, and graduated in 2.5 years with a psychology degree and minors in creative writing and art. He edited the campus humor magazine, Shaft, and created a feature called Co-Ed of the Month. If you were watching closely, you could see it taking shape. At Northwestern, doing graduate work in sociology, Hefner wrote a term paper on American sex laws. He'd been reading the Kinsey reports, the groundbreaking studies on human sexuality that had scandalized and fascinated post-war America in equal measure. Kinsey's research showed that Americans did all sorts of things in private that they condemned in public. Hefner saw an opportunity, not just a magazine opportunity, a philosophical one. But first, he had to fail. In 1951, Hefner took a job as a copywriter at Esquire magazine, earning $60 a week. When Esquire moved its offices to New York, Hefner asked for a $5 raise. They said no. He quit. Years later, he'd call that rejection an extremely important occasion. It was the match that lit the fuse. He tried to launch a Chicago-focused magazine with a colleague. It didn't work. He took another job, this time as circulation manager for a children's magazine, and spent his nights at the kitchen table in his Hyde Park apartment, planning something different, something that would combine the sophistication of Esquire with something Esquire wouldn't touch. By the summer of 1953, the idea had become an obsession. He found 45 investors willing to bet on him, $8,000 total, including $1,000 from his mother. He borrowed $600 more, using his apartment furniture as collateral. He found a printer. He found a distributor. He acquired the rights to a nude calendar photograph of Marilyn Monroe from 1949. The first issue of Playboy appeared on newsstands in December 1953. Hefner was so uncertain there would ever be a second issue that he didn't put a date on the cover. The magazine sold for 50 cents. It sold 50,000 copies. The message inside that first issue would define everything that came after. We like our apartment. We enjoy mixing up cocktails and an hors d'oeuvre or two, putting a little mood music on the phonograph and inviting in a female acquaintance for a quiet discussion on Picasso, Nietzsche, jazz, sex. This was the Playboy philosophy, not just nudity. Hefner could never have built an empire on that alone. It was the idea that pleasure was respectable, that sophistication and sex weren't opposites, that a man could be cultured and carnal, intellectual and indulgent all at once. It was a response to the Puritanism Hefner had grown up with, a rebellion against his mother's missionary hopes, a bet that post-war America was ready to stop pretending. And with that, a movement began. Not just a magazine, a philosophy. By the end of the 1950s, Playboy magazine was selling more than 1 million copies a month. Advertising revenues had skyrocketed to $2.3 million. In 1959, Hefner held the first Playboy Jazz Festival at Chicago Stadium, what people called at the time the greatest single weekend in the history of jazz. Miles Davis played. Duke Ellington played. The magazine wasn't just publishing pictures of beautiful women. It was becoming the arbiter of American cool. That same year, Hefner bought a mansion, 1340 North State Parkway, a 30,000 square foot brick and limestone residence in Chicago's Gold Coast, built in 1899 for a prominent surgeon whose social circle had included Theodore Roosevelt. Hefner paid $370,000 in cash, the equivalent of nearly $4 million today. He had plans for it. But he had bigger plans for something else. The inspiration came from Chicago's gaslight clubs of the 1950s, establishments where waitresses wore provocative attire and men could feel, for an evening, like they'd entered a different world. Hefner's vision was to take that concept and brand it, to create a physical space where the fantasy of the magazine came to life. My initial concern, Hefner would later say, was how to recreate for club members the fantasy that was reflected in the pages of the magazine. As it turned out, we put it all together, and they brought the fantasy with them. Victor Loans III had met Hefner at a Chicago party in 1954 and recognized a kindred spirit. Loans became Playboy's marketing director, and then, much more than that, he's credited with creating the Playboy Club concept, the key system, the bunny uniforms, the atmosphere of exclusive sophistication. His ad campaign, "What Sort of Man Reads Playboy?" sold not just a magazine but an identity. On February 29, 1960, Leap Day, which seemed appropriate somehow, the first Playboy Club opened at 116 East Walton Street in downtown Chicago. The city had tried to stop them. Officials objected to the bunny costume, objected to the concept of Playboy. Hefner had to go to court just to get a license. But when those doors finally opened, the crowds came anyway. Despite freezing temperatures, lines stretched down the block. Cars pulled up 2 and 3 deep. Opening night featured performers Bobby Short, Irwin Corey, Mabel Mercer, Mae Barnes, and, according to some accounts, a 17-year-old singer named Aretha Franklin. For $50, you got a lifetime membership. For $25 a year, you got a key, a rabbit head key, metal numbered yours. It was the first thing you'd present when you walked in. The door bunny would examine it, and then you were inside. The club served $1.50 meals and affordable drinks. The atmosphere was upscale without being snobbish. You could eat prime rib and watch Ella Fitzgerald, all for less than a comparable dinner in most American cities. And everywhere you looked, there were the bunnies. The costume itself was a piece of engineering. Strapless satin corset designed to accentuate every curve. Bunny ears, bow tie, cuffs, collar, cottontail, 3-inch heels minimum. The whole ensemble, credited with some historical dispute to African-American designer Zelda Wynne Valdez, who'd dressed Ella Fitzgerald and Dorothy Dandridge, became the first commercial uniform registered by the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Hugh's brother Keith developed a 44-page training manual called the Bunny Bible. It covered everything: how to serve, how to stand the bunny stance, a model's pose with one hip jutted out, how to perform the bunny dip, that signature back-leaning move that let a bunny place drinks on a low table without bending over in a way that would be, as management put it, undignified. Demerits for chewing gum, demerits for a scruffy tail, demerits for anything that broke the illusion. Bunnies were required to weigh in weekly. The fantasy was the product. The fantasy had to be maintained. By the end of the first year, 50,000 people had joined. Lines stretched down Michigan Avenue, even when temperatures dropped below zero. The Chicago Club had become the busiest nightclub in the world. In the final 3 months of 1961 alone, more than 132,000 people walked through those doors. And then came the expansion. Miami opened in 1961, New Orleans the same year. The New York Club opened in December 1962 at 5 East 59th Street. St. Louis followed. By 1965, there were 13 Playboy Clubs in operation, grossing $19.7 million, 41% of the company's entire revenue. But a statistic tells you less than a scene. Imagine walking into the Chicago Club on a Saturday night in 1963. You present your key. The door bunny smiles. Inside, 4 different rooms, each with its own atmosphere. In the living room, a pianist plays while a close-up magician works the tables. In the Playmate bar, men nurse whiskeys and watch the bunnies glide past. In the dining room, prime rib arrives on silver platters. And in the club room, a comedian named Dick Gregory is about to change American entertainment forever. Gregory had been working at a black-owned club on the South Side when Hugh Hefner spotted him. On January 13, 1961, the Playboy Club needed a last-minute replacement act. The club manager panicked when he saw the room was packed with white Southern executives from a frozen food convention. He almost sent Gregory home. Gregory refused to leave. When the first heckler shouted a racial slur, Gregory didn't flinch. "I always admired Roy Rogers' horse," he said, referring to the horse named Trigger. The room went silent. Then it laughed. Gregory killed for 2 hours. Hefner was called out of bed for the second show and offered him a long-term contract on the spot. "Before Hugh Hefner brought me in," Gregory would later say, "no black comic in the history of America was permitted to work white nightclubs. You could sing, you could dance, but you couldn't stand flat-footed and talk." This was what Playboy became in those years. Not just entertainment, not just a place for men to feel sophisticated. It became, improbably, a venue where barriers were broken, where Gloria Johnson became the first black bunny in Chicago 3 years before the Civil Rights Act, where Hefner bought back franchised clubs in Miami and New Orleans because they practiced racial discrimination, where entertainers of every background could work a circuit that stretched coast to coast. The engine was roaring now, and there seemed to be no limit to how far it could go. To understand what the Playboy Clubs meant, you have to understand what they felt like. The Chicago Club, the flagship, the original, sprawled across multiple floors, each with its own atmosphere, its own purpose, its own rhythm. The living room was intimate. Leather chairs, low lighting, local musicians playing standards while magicians performed sleight of hand at your table, coins vanishing, cards appearing, the kind of personal attention that made you feel like you were the only customer in the room. The Playmate bar was different, louder, more social, a place to see and be seen. Men in suits leaned against the bar and watched the bunnies move between tables with trays balanced on their palms. The uniforms caught the light, satin gleaming, cottontails bouncing slightly as they walked. The The dining room was where you came for an occasion. White tablecloths, silver service, prime rib carved tableside, lobster flown in from Maine, the smell of the place, butter melting, beef fat searing, cigars in the smoking room, expensive perfume mingling with coffee. This wasn't diner food served by women in costumes. This was fine dining, and the costumed women made it more interesting, not less. And the club room, that's where the legends performed, where Sinatra crooned to crowds who'd flown in from across the country just to see him, where Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. worked the Playboy circuit because the venues were prestigious, the audiences appreciative, and the money was good. Sam DiStefano, Playboy's musical director, led a 32-piece house orchestra that backed performers from Tony Bennett to Dionne Warwick, from Liza Minnelli to Mel Torme. The entertainers could have worked anywhere. They chose to work here. At the Chicago mansion, 1340 North State Parkway, Hugh Hefner had created something even more elaborate. The basement held a swimming pool with a glass wall and an attached bar, the original grotto that would become part of Playboy mythology, a game room, a bowling alley, 2 floors of dormitory space for bunnies who worked the Chicago club and wanted affordable housing close to the action. The rent was $50 a month. Maid service was included. Room service from the mansion kitchen ran 24 hours, and a bunny getting off a 3 a.m. shift could order lobster if she wanted. A brass plate hung by the front door, a gift from Playboy's editorial director. It read in Latin, "Si non oscillas, noli tintinare." If you don't swing, don't ring. This was where the parties happened. The Friday night parties at the Playboy Mansion became legendary, celebrity guests streaming in and out, Barbra Streisand and Tony Curtis and Warren Beatty, the Rolling Stones, who stayed 4 days and trashed several rooms and were never invited back. Hefner moved through the crowds with a pipe in his mouth, looking like Jay Gatsby reincarnated in bunny ears. And then there were the resorts. Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, opened in 1968, architecture inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright, a ski slope, one of the first in the Midwest to install a chairlift. The same 32-piece orchestra that backed Sinatra in Chicago backed entertainers here too. Guests could spend a weekend surrounded by Wisconsin forest, skiing during the day, watching world-class entertainment at night, all under the Playboy banner. Great Gorge in McAfee, New Jersey, was even more ambitious. A $20 million resort spread across 1,000 acres, 800 rooms, a 27-hole golf course designed by George Fazio, indoor pools, an Olympic-sized outdoor pool. The performers who headlined read like a history of American entertainment. Frank Sinatra, Harry Belafonte, Tony Bennett, Johnny Cash, Sammy Davis Jr., Bob Hope, Dean Martin, the Supremes, Dionne Warwick. The resort even hosted the first New Jersey Special Olympics. Hefner had hoped New Jersey would legalize gambling and he could add a casino. It never happened. But for a while, it didn't matter. The guests came anyway. Jamaica, London, Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Sapporo, Montreal, Manila. The Playboy Clubs spread across the world, each one offering the same promise. For the price of a membership, you could be part of something exclusive, something sophisticated, something that your father and certainly your grandfather would have considered scandalous, but which now seemed not just acceptable but aspirational. At the peak, more than 25,000 women had worn the ears. They came from everywhere. College students working through tuition, actresses waiting for their big break, young women from small towns who'd heard the ads. Attractive young girls can now earn $200 to $300 a week and thought that's more than a secretary makes, more than a teacher makes, more than almost any job available to a woman in 1965. The training was rigorous. Bunny school lasted days. There was the Bunny Mother lecture covering grooming and deportment, the Bunny Father lecture covering club rules and expectations, Bunny Bible study, yes, they called it that, memorizing the 44-page manual that governed every aspect of the job, floor training, written tests, hours practicing the bunny dip until it became second nature, the back-leaning move that kept you dignified while setting down a drink, that became so identified with the brand, it was almost a logo in motion. The costume itself was an education in engineering and endurance. The corset had boning in the waist. That would have made Scarlett O'Hara blanch, as Gloria Steinem would later write. The zipper caught skin if you weren't careful. Dry cleaning bags were stuffed into the bodice for extra cleavage. The 3-inch heels were mandatory, and some bunnies found their feet permanently enlarged by half a size after years on the floor. Demerits governed everything. Chewing gum, demerits. Scruffy tail, demerits. Weight fluctuation caught in weekly weigh-ins, demerits. Not maintaining the mandated cheer. Bunnies must always appear gay and cheerful, demerits. And yet, it was the closest thing that I had ever felt to ever really belonging to anything. That's Gloria Johnson talking, the first black bunny at the Chicago Club. Hired years before the Civil Rights Act mandated equal employment. She'd found something at Playboy that she hadn't found anywhere else, a community, a belonging. She'd dance on top of the piano in her 3-inch heels, and the crowd would love it, and she would feel, for those hours, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not every bunny felt that way. In 1963, a young journalist named Gloria Steinem went undercover at the New York Club for an expose in Show magazine. She documented the gap between the advertised salary and the reality: lower pay after costume fees, heel requirements, deductions. She documented the demerits, the weigh-ins, the mandatory physical exams, which Hefner would eliminate after her article ran. She called it phony glamour, hiding exploitative employment policies. Both perspectives were true. Both women were describing the same place. Some bunnies found exploitation, some found opportunity. A former bunny who trained Steinem during her undercover stint later became one of the highest-ranking women at Blue Cross, and said she still never made as much as she'd earned carrying trays at the Playboy Club. In 1975, about 100 bunnies at the Chicago Club went on strike. They wanted better tips, fairer scheduling, fewer rules about their off-duty behavior, no dating club members, restrictions on where they could be seen in public. The strike lasted 2 weeks. They won some concessions. The rules relaxed slightly. But by then, the rules were already starting not to matter as much. Something was shifting. Dick Gregory's breakthrough at the Chicago Playboy Club in January 1961 opened a door that had been locked for as long as American entertainment had existed. Before Hugh Hefner brought me in, no black comic in the history of America was permitted to work white nightclubs. You could sing, you could dance, but you couldn't stand flat-footed and talk. Gregory could stand flat-footed and talk. He talked about racism, about segregation, about lynching, and the white audiences laughed. Not uncomfortable laughter, real laughter. They'd paid their $25 for a key. They'd walked into Hefner's palace of pleasure, and now they were laughing at jokes about the thing America didn't want to discuss. Hefner himself was watching. The Playboy Clubs admitted black patrons when many establishments wouldn't. They hired black entertainers to perform for white audiences at a time when such bookings were rare. When Hefner discovered that franchise clubs in Miami and New Orleans were practicing racial discrimination, he bought the franchises back. Gloria Johnson wasn't a token, she was a policy. In 1964, when 3 civil rights workers disappeared in Mississippi, Hefner provided $25,000 for the search. The FBI, which had been criticized for inaction, eventually followed suit with its own reward. The bodies were found 44 days later. This was the contradiction of Playboy, an enterprise built on objectification that broke racial barriers. A men's club that gave women some of the best-paying service jobs available to them. A temple of hedonism that funded civil rights and First Amendment cases and published interviews with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. People trying to understand Playboy often want to place it on one side or the other, progressive or exploitative, liberating or degrading. The truth was messier. It was both. It was all of it at once. And for entertainers, it was a circuit, the Playboy circuit. 52 weeks of work if you wanted it, club to club, coast to coast, around the world. The house orchestras were top-notch. The audiences were attentive. The money was good. And the prestige of playing a Playboy venue was real. Sinatra didn't need the work. He played anyway. By the early 1970s, the numbers were staggering. 22 operational clubs in the United States, international locations in London, Jamaica, Japan, Manila, Montreal, 750,000 members worldwide by the late 1970s, 230,000 key holders by 1976. The London casino wasn't just profitable, it was the most profitable casino in the world, contributing $32 million to Playboy's coffers. The clubs accounted for 26% of company revenue at their peak. Total company sales approached $175 million annually. The magazine hit 7.2 million circulation in November 1972, the highest it would ever reach. James Bond was a key holder. In Diamonds Are Forever, 1971, Sean Connery's Bond carries a Playboy key as part of his identity. That's what the key meant by then. It wasn't just a membership card. It was shorthand for a certain kind of man, sophisticated, successful, worldly, the kind of man who read Playboy, according to the ads. The kind of man everyone was supposed to want to be. The Big Bunny jet, that $4.5 million black DC-9 with the rabbit logo on its tail, taxied past travelers at O'Hare like a taunt. Look what this company can afford. Look how far a magazine and some nightclubs and a philosophy can take you. Television shows, Playboy's Penthouse, from 1959 to 1961, Playboy After Dark from 1968 to 1970. Guests included everyone from Sammy Davis Jr. to the Grateful Dead, from Nat King Cole to Ike and Tina Turner. Parties at the mansion drew celebrities from every corner of American life. This was the empire at its height. This was the moment when it seemed like nothing could stop the Playboy machine from spreading across the world, from defining American leisure for generations to come. This was the peak. In 1972, the numbers told a story of invincibility. Magazine circulation, 7.2 million, the November issue, the highest it would ever go. Pre-tax profits approaching $20 million. They'd hit that mark in 1973. The company was nearing 1,000 advertising pages per issue. On November 3rd, 1971, Playboy Enterprises had gone public at $23.50 a share. The empire sprawled, 17 clubs, 3 gambling casinos in the UK, 4 resort hotels, 2 movie theaters. Playboy Productions was making films. There was a record company, a book division, modeling and limousine agencies. Dozens of merchandise items carried the bunny logo. The brand was everywhere. Hugh Hefner had become a worldwide celebrity. People knew his face, his pipe, his silk pajamas, his rotating bed. Chicago was no longer defined by Al Capone. Chicago, in some circles, was defined by Playboy. Chicago became Playboy, one observer noted. The mansion on State Parkway was the new symbol of the city's self-image, not gangsters, but glamour. If you stood in the Chicago Club in 1973, surrounded by all of it, the orchestra playing, the bunnies serving, the celebrities and executives, and regular guys with their prized keys, you would have seen nothing but horizon, growth forever, expansion forever, the fantasy made permanent. But if you looked closely, certain things might have caught your attention. Hefner was increasingly absent from Chicago. He'd bought a second mansion in Los Angeles, Playboy Mansion West, in 1971, and he was spending more time there. California had celebrities, sunshine, Hollywood. Chicago had winter, and what Hefner saw as Midwestern conservatism. Competition was emerging. Penthouse magazine had launched in 1965, offering something more explicit. Larry Flint's Hustler would arrive in 1974, offering something more explicit still. The sexual liberation that Playboy had championed was creating a marketplace where Playboy's tasteful approach suddenly seemed tame. The feminist movement was gaining traction. Gloria Steinem's 1963 expose had been just the beginning. By 1969, protesters from women's liberation were confronting women lined up for Playboy bunny recruitment. The cultural conversation about objectification was getting louder, and the bunny dormitory at the Chicago mansion, that 2-floor facility that had once held 36 women, was growing emptier. The rules were too strict. The hours were too long. By mid-1975, only 6 bunnies would be living there. These were hairline cracks, invisible to anyone not looking for them. The financial reports still showed growth. The clubs still filled on Saturday nights. The entertainers still wanted to play the Playboy circuit. But 1973 would be the peak, the absolute summit. And standing at that height, looking out at an empire that seemed invincible, nobody could see the cliff on the other side. The decisions that would destroy everything were already beginning. Hefner was looking west toward Los Angeles, away from the clubs that had made him. Victor Loans was building the UK casino into a juggernaut that would become indispensable and then be lost in scandal. The format that had seemed so fresh in 1960 was starting to feel, to younger audiences, like something their fathers would enjoy. What thrills one generation becomes quaint to the next. What seems daring at 25 seems dated at 45. The revolution that Playboy had launched was eating its children. The doors that Hefner had opened couldn't be closed, and on the other side of those doors were competitors who would offer more for less, without the membership fees or the dress codes or the pretense of sophistication. But that's getting ahead of the story. For now, in this frozen moment, 1973, the summit, let the orchestra play. Let the bunnies serve their drinks with perfect dips. Let the key holders feel like they've arrived at the place every American man is supposed to want to be. This was the peak. They just didn't know what came next. The first cracks were invisible unless you knew where to look. In 1973, the same year Playboy hit peak profits, a different kind of magazine arrived on American newsstands. Ms. Magazine had launched the year before, and Gloria Steinem, the same Gloria Steinem who'd gone undercover as a bunny a decade earlier, was now one of the most recognized voices of second-wave feminism. The conversation about women, work, and objectification had shifted. What had seemed daring in 1960 was starting to feel, to a new generation, like something else entirely. The bunnies themselves were changing. The women who'd lined up around the block for auditions in 1962, women who saw the ears and the corset as a path to independence, to income their mothers could never have earned, were being replaced by women who had more options. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 had opened doors. The women's movement was opening more. A young woman in 1975 could imagine careers that a young woman in 1960 could not. The bunny costume, which had once represented opportunity, was beginning to represent something more complicated. And then there was the competition. Penthouse had launched in 1965, offering what Playboy wouldn't: more explicit imagery, fewer pretenses of sophistication. By the early 70s, Bob Guccione's magazine was eating into Playboy's market share. Larry Flynt's Hustler arrived in 1974, cruder still, aimed at men who didn't need the jazz interviews and the literary fiction to justify their purchase. The sexual revolution that Hefner had helped ignite was producing competitors who would go further, faster, without apology. The clubs felt this pressure in ways the magazine didn't. A penthouse didn't need a membership key. A strip club didn't require a dress code. The exclusivity that had once made Playboy Club special was becoming, for younger customers, an inconvenience. Why pay $25 a year for the privilege of buying drinks when you could walk into a dozen other establishments for free? The format itself was aging. The supper club model, orchestras, prime rib, table service, belonged to an earlier era of American nightlife. Disco was coming. Studio 54 would open in 1977, and suddenly, the idea of sitting in a leather chair while a 32-piece orchestra played standards would seem not sophisticated but stodgy. The young professionals who should have been the next generation of key holders were dancing under strobe lights, not watching close-up magic acts. Inside the company, the focus was shifting. Hugh Hefner had moved to Los Angeles in 1974, and his attention moved with him. The mansion parties continued, but now they were in Holmby Hills, not on State Parkway. The Chicago headquarters felt increasingly like a satellite office for a man whose real life was happening 3 time zones away. The UK casinos had become the company's cash cow. The London Playboy Club, with its gaming operation, was generating $32 million a year, more than all the American clubs combined. Victor Loans, who'd helped create the bunny concept 2 decades earlier, was now running the British operation like his own fiefdom. The profits were extraordinary, the scrutiny was minimal, and the practices that would eventually destroy everything were already in place. But in Chicago, in New York, in the clubs that had built the empire, the crowds were thinning, not dramatically, not yet, but the Saturday nights that had once required reservations weeks in advance were becoming Saturday nights where you could walk in off the street. The key holders who'd treasured their membership were letting it lapse. The magic that had seemed permanent was starting to fade. The first fatal decision was geographic. When Hugh Hefner relocated to Los Angeles in 1974, he didn't just move his residence. He moved his attention. The mansion parties that had defined Chicago's social scene were now happening in California. The celebrities who'd once flown to the Midwest were now driving to Holmby Hills. And the clubs, the physical spaces that had turned a magazine into an empire, became in Hefner's mind secondary. The clubs, he would later say, had served their purpose. Perhaps he believed that. Perhaps he'd grown tired of the operational headaches, the union negotiations, the local politicians who still looked at the bunny ears with suspicion. Perhaps California sunshine simply felt better than Chicago winters. But the founders' withdrawal sent a signal through the organization. The future wasn't in the clubs. The future was somewhere else. The second fatal decision was financial. By the mid-1970s, the UK gaming operation had become indispensable. The London casino alone was generating profits that dwarfed the American clubs. Victor Loans had built something remarkable, and something that made the company dangerously dependent on a single revenue stream, in a single country, in an industry with a single regulator. The Gaming Board of Great Britain had been watching. In 1981, the board revoked Playboy's UK gaming licenses. The official reasons involved ICHIP and other credit procedures, technical violations, regulatory infractions, the kind of paperwork failures that might have resulted in fines for other operators. But the revocation was total. Overnight, Playboy lost access to the British gaming market. $32 million a year gone. The company scrambled. They'd been planning a major casino in Atlantic City, where gambling had been legalized in 1978. The New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement began its own investigation and discovered that the UK operation had, among other things, allowed organized crime figures to run up substantial debts. The Atlantic City license was denied. 2 gaming markets closed, the most profitable division of the company eliminated, and Victor Loans, the man who'd helped create the bunny, who'd built the UK empire, who'd been Hefner's closest business partner for 2 decades, was fired. The third fatal decision was philosophical. In the aftermath of the gaming disaster, Playboy Enterprises had to choose: double down on the clubs or pivot away from them. They chose to pivot. The logic seemed reasonable. The clubs were expensive to operate. Union labor, prime real estate, live entertainment. The profit margins had never matched the gaming operations, and now the gaming operations were gone. Meanwhile, licensing, putting the bunny logo on products, on casinos owned by other companies, on anything that would pay for the privilege, required almost no capital and generated almost pure profit. The clubs, management concluded, were an albatross. That word, albatross, would appear in company communications in interviews, in the internal logic that justified what came next. An albatross, something that had once helped you fly, now dragging you down, something to be cut loose. What the spreadsheets couldn't show was what those clubs still meant to the employees who'd built careers there, to the communities that had grown up around them, to the idea of Playboy itself, not as a magazine, not as a logo, but as a place you could walk into, a fantasy made physical, a world you could inhabit for an evening. The fourth fatal decision was the closures themselves. On June 30th, 1986, the Chicago Playboy Club closed. The New York Club closed. The Los Angeles Club closed. All on the same day. Not a gradual wind down, not a market-by-market assessment, but a single coordinated ending. The flagship and two of the most prominent locations gone in 24 hours. The announcement had come months earlier. Hefner himself had delivered the eulogy before the body was cold. "The bunny image," he said, "doesn't really reflect what Playboy is and means today. The bunny image is really a symbol of the past. A symbol of the past." 25 years after the first door bunny examined the first key in Chicago, the founder was calling his own creation obsolete. The remaining clubs, Des Moines, Omaha, Lansing, lingered. They'd been franchised operations, not company-owned, and their fates were left to local operators who still believed there was a market for what Playboy had built. But without the flagship, without the network, without the circuit that had once kept entertainers working 52 weeks a year, the remaining clubs were orphans. Lansing, Michigan would be the last. The final American Playboy Club stood in a highway interchange. Lansing, the state capital of Michigan, a city of government workers and auto industry suppliers, of chain restaurants and business hotels. The Playboy Club there had opened in 1980, a franchise operation in a low-rise building near the intersection of I-496 and US 127. Across the parking lot, a Holiday Inn. Down the road, McDonald's, Wendy's, self-serve gas stations, advertising regular unleaded for 89 cents a gallon. This was not the Gold Coast of Chicago. This was not Fifth Avenue. This was a club that had been born during the empire's decline. A franchise sold to a local operator who'd believed the brand still meant something, located in a market that had never asked for sophistication and didn't know what to do with it when it arrived. And yet, for 8 years, the Lansing Club had survived. Bunnies still wore the ears. Drinks still arrived via the bunny dip. Local businessmen still held their keys, still felt, when they walked through those doors, that they were part of something larger than a highway interchange in central Michigan. By 1988, the club was struggling. The entertainment budget couldn't support the caliber of acts that had once defined the circuit. The membership numbers were declining. The bunny roster was thin, and the decision had been made. Lansing would close. The final night was July 9th, 1988. The marquee outside, the kind of marquee you'd see at any small-town venue, black letters on white plastic, read, "Help US Celebrate. Not help us, but help US." A last attempt at wordplay, at the kind of sophisticated cleverness that Playboy had always aspired to, now reduced to a farewell pun on a budget sign. The club was nearly empty. The bunnies who worked that final shift, how many were there? A handful, serving drinks to the last key holders who'd shown up for the ending. Men in their 50s and 60s who remembered what the clubs had been, who'd maybe visited the Chicago flagship in its glory days, who were here now because they couldn't imagine letting it end without witness. At closing time, the doors were locked. The lights went off. The last American Playboy Club was finished. No press conference, no celebrity farewell, no orchestra playing a final standard. Just a building in a highway interchange, going dark like any other failed restaurant, any other business that couldn't make the numbers work. 28 years after the first club opened in Chicago, after Sinatra and Sammy and Ella, after 1 million key holders and 25,000 bunnies, after the busiest nightclub in the world and the most profitable casino in London, it ended in Lansing, Michigan. In silence, the bunnies scattered. 25,000 women had worn the ears across 3 decades. Some had moved on years before the closures, had built careers in other industries, had framed their bunny photos and hung them in home offices where they'd become conversation starters at dinner parties. Former bunnies became executives, entrepreneurs, politicians. Lauren Hutton had been a bunny. Debbie Harry had been a bunny. The training in poise and service and performing under pressure had translated for many into skills that served them well. Others had stayed until the end. Women who'd built their lives around the clubs, who'd never found another job that paid as well or felt as alive. When the Chicago Club closed in 1986, some of those women were in their 40s, their 50s, too young to retire, too old, in the eyes of many employers, to start over. The job market of the late 1980s didn't have a category for former Playboy bunny, 20 years experience. There were reunions eventually. Bunny alumni organizations formed in several cities. Women who'd worked together in the 60s and 70s found each other again, shared photographs, shared stories, tried to explain to their grandchildren what it had been like. The sisterhood that had formed in those clubs, the shared experience of the costume, the rules, the customers, the late nights, outlasted the clubs themselves. The buildings had varied fates. The Chicago flagship at 116 East Walton became office space. The building still stands. You can walk past it today, look up at windows that once looked down on lines stretching around the block, and see nothing that indicates what happened there. No plaque, no marker, just another address in the Gold Coast. The Chicago mansion, 1340 North State Parkway, was sold. Hefner had already moved west, and without the bunny dormitory, without the parties, the building was just a very large house with a very unusual history. It changed hands several times. The grotto was filled in. The bowling alley became storage space. The rooms where Barbra Streisand and Tony Curtis had partied became eventually somebody's living room. The resorts fared worse. Lake Geneva became, for a while, an Americana resort, then changed hands again and again as operators tried to figure out what to do with a Frank Lloyd Wright-inspired complex that had been built for a brand that no longer wanted it. Great Gorge in New Jersey struggled through multiple owners before parts of it were demolished and the rest was converted to a water park. Playboy Enterprises itself survived, transformed. The magazine continued, though circulation declined decade by decade. The brand became primarily a licensing operation. The bunny logo appeared on everything from cologne to clothing, generating revenue without requiring Playboy to actually operate anything. Hugh Hefner retreated to the Los Angeles mansion, where he continued to host parties, continued to appear in silk pajamas surrounded by young women, continued to perform the role of Hugh Hefner until his death in 2017, at the age of 91. There were attempts at revival. In 2006, a new Playboy Club opened at the Palms Casino Resort in Las Vegas. Bunnies in updated costumes, a VIP room, the promise of bringing back the magic for a new generation. It lasted less than a year. In 2011, a London Playboy Club reopened in Mayfair. Then clubs in Cancun, in India, in Macau, each announced with fanfare, each positioned as the return of an icon. None of them captured what the original clubs had been. The format that had worked in 1960, the orchestra, the membership keys, the elaborate service rituals, didn't translate to a world that had moved on. The revivals felt like theme restaurants, like cosplay, like a brand trying to monetize nostalgia without understanding what had made the original special. As of this writing, no American Playboy Club operates anywhere in the United States. There are no ruins exactly. The Playboy Clubs didn't leave behind crumbling structures, didn't leave behind shopping mall carcasses with broken skylights and overgrown parking lots. They were leased spaces mostly, hotel ballrooms, and urban storefronts that, when the bunny logo came down, simply became something else. The physical traces were absorbed, renovated, erased, but if you know where to look, you can find the ghosts. 116 East Walton Street, Chicago. Walk past it on a winter afternoon. The building is limestone and brick, early 20th century, unremarkable now among the Gold Coast's aging elegance. Office workers enter and exit through doors that once required a rabbit head key for admission. No sign marks what happened here. No historical plaque notes that this was, for a decade, the busiest nightclub in the world. If you stood inside in 1963, you'd have heard a 32-piece orchestra. You'd have smelled prime rib and perfume and cigars. You'd have watched bunnies glide between tables in costumes that had been patented by the federal government. You'd have seen Dick Gregory make white audiences laugh about racism. You'd have believed that this place, this moment, this feeling would last forever. Today, it's a building where people have meetings about quarterly projections and reply to emails. The Lake Geneva resort still stands, after a fashion. The original Playboy structures have been absorbed into a larger complex, renovated beyond recognition. The ski slope where guests once carved powder between shows is still there. Wisconsin doesn't move its geography, but the 32-piece orchestra is gone. The bunny service is gone. The feeling of being somewhere special, somewhere that mattered, somewhere that celebrities flew to on winter weekends, that's gone too. The Los Angeles mansion endures. After Hefner's death in 2017, it was sold to a neighbor, Darren Metropolis, whose family made its fortune selling Twinkies and Pabst Blue Ribbon for $100 million. Hefner had been allowed to live there until his death as part of the sale agreement. Now it's a private residence, occasionally glimpsed in aerial photographs. The grotto still intact, the party's over. What survives is the idea, the bunny logo on merchandise, the brand name licensing deals, the cultural reference that everyone still understands, even if they've never seen a Playboy Club in operation. Say Playboy Bunny, and people still picture it, the ears, the corset, the cottontail. The image persists even as the reality has vanished. And somewhere, in attics and basements and safety deposit boxes, the keys still exist. Rabbit head metal keys, numbered, polished by hands that haven't touched them in decades. Keepsakes from a world that promised sophistication and belonging, and the feeling that you'd arrived somewhere that mattered. The keys don't open anything anymore. In the end, what was it? A nightclub empire that rose and fell in less than 3 decades. A place where women in costumes served drinks to men who paid for the privilege of belonging. A venue where racial barriers broke and feminist critiques formed. A business that made its founder one of the most famous men in America, and then became, in his own words, an albatross around his neck. It was all of these things. It was none of them completely. The Playboy Clubs were a bet that American men wanted sophistication without stuffiness, pleasure without guilt, fantasy made physical and accessible for the price of a membership key. For a while, the bet paid off spectacularly. The lines stretched around the block. The celebrities performed for crowds that had flown in from across the country. The bunnies, 25,000 of them, walked floors that hummed with the particular energy of a place that mattered. And then the bet stopped paying. The culture shifted, the competition multiplied, the founder looked west and the casinos crumbled, and the spreadsheet said the clubs were a burden, and what had seemed permanent revealed itself to be as temporary as any other fashion, any other moment, any other way of having a good time on a Saturday night. What remains is complicated. The women who wore the ears, some remember exploitation, some remember empowerment, most remember both. The customers who held the keys, some remember belonging, some remember disappointment, most remember a version of themselves that no longer exists. The entertainers who worked the circuit, they remember audiences who listened, venues that paid, a network that kept working musicians working. And the silence. That remains too. The silence of 116 East Walton, where no orchestra plays. The silence of the Lake Geneva slopes, where no comedian warms up a crowd between runs. The silence of a Lansing highway interchange, where a sign once read, "Help US Celebrate," and now reads nothing at all. Hugh Hefner built an empire on the idea that pleasure was respectable, that a man could be sophisticated and sensual, intellectual and indulgent, that there was nothing wrong with wanting beauty and music and good food and beautiful women, and that anyone who said otherwise was a Puritan clinging to a world that was already gone. For a while, millions of Americans agreed with him. They bought the magazine, they joined the clubs, they held the keys, and then they didn't. The world moved on, the clubs closed, the keys stopped opening anything. What happens to a fantasy when the world decides it doesn't need it anymore? It becomes what all fantasies become eventually: a memory, a photograph, a story someone tells about what it used to be like, back when you could walk through certain doors and feel, for an evening, like you belonged to something special. The doors are closed now. The keys don't work anymore. What remains is the question nobody answered in time. Not whether the fantasy was real, but whether it ever could have lasted. Whether anything that thrilling, that specific, that much a product of its moment, could have survived the moment's passing. The Playboy Clubs were built for a world that was already changing. They rose on the energy of liberation and fell on the complications that liberation creates. They gave 25,000 women a job that paid better than anything else available to them. And then the world created other jobs. They gave 1 million men a place to feel sophisticated, and then sophistication stopped requiring a membership key. Standing in the silence of what's left, no, not even silence, just ordinary noise, just traffic and construction, and the ambient hum of a world that doesn't remember. You can almost hear it. The orchestra tuning up, the ice clinking in glasses, the laughter of an audience that's about to watch something remarkable, the soft shuffle of 3-inch heels on carpet. Almost, but almost isn't the same as still. Almost is what we're left with when the doors close and the lights go off, and the world that once existed inside becomes just another building, just another address, just another story someone tells about the way things used to be. The Playboy Clubs are gone. What remains is what always remains: memory and silence, and the keys that don't open anything anymore.